I remembered. Yeah, good. What I'd like to ask you to do is, if you would, I am not hearing any background noise from everybody, but I do like hearing your faces. If you would go ahead and mute yourself, but then if you've got a question, feel free to come in and ask a question as I'm going along. And I will stop periodically and ask you if you've got any questions, or if there's a particular bird you're interested in, or a particular location you're interested in, then feel free to go ahead and interrupt me. It's okay. And once again, the program is being recorded, and so I will post it and share it with you all. So in case there's anything that you wanted to watch again, you could, or even share it with somebody else. So I am Kathy Adams Clark. Thank you very much for joining me. And I have been leading tours with Strabo Tours since 2003, 2004. So it's been a very long time that we've been leading tours together. And I know many of your faces, so I know a lot of you all have gone on a Strabo tour. But this adventure to the Danube Delta is something new. And just listening to you all talk, I can tell I've got a lot of travelers in this room. So I am sure that you have crossed the Danube somewhere along your travels, or you've come in contact with it somewhere along in your travels. The Danube is 1,770 miles. It's the second largest river in Europe behind the Volga. And it begins in the foothills of Germany, and then follows along, crosses into Vienna, and then Budapest and Belgrade, and then eventually becomes the lower southern border of Romania, and then dumps into the Black Sea. So it's a fairly important river, but of course, because so many people live upon it, it's got lots of dams and that type of thing in it. And if you look at the map of Western or Eastern Europe, then you can see, that we've got Vienna and Budapest here, and we've got Belgrade, and then Bucharest down in here. So that gives you an idea of where Romania is, in case you are geographically challenged. Romania is in the eastern part of Europe, and it is on the Black Sea. And if you are considering going to Romania on something like the Danube Delta, I would really recommend that you stay in Bucharest for a couple of days. It is called the Paris of the East. It has a lot of fabulous architecture, and it's a blend of old and new everywhere you walk. So it is, it's a really beautiful city, very walkable, especially in the historic district. And then if you get a chance to explore the rest of Romania, Strabo does have tours that go to the rest of Romania. And Romania is a beautiful country in terms of its culture and its heritage, and how what it looks like. It's got great architecture, it's got great countryside, and the people are super friendly and nice all around throughout the entire country. I've made several trips to Romania over the years on the photo tours. So Bucharest, you can see where that is on the map. And then if we go just a little bit more to the east, where that red circle is, then that is where the Danube Delta is. So that's where the Danube is going to dump into the Black Sea. And if we get just a little bit closer, you see now I'm showing you Bucharest a little bit more prominent. All this area over on the eastern side of the country is what's called the Danube Delta. So it's a massive, huge area of territory and of land where we're going to travel. And in that Danube Delta, where the Danube finally starts dumping into the Black Sea, there are 3 channels, and not unusual to any river deltas that you've been around before. The river will usually break into different channels. And the channel up on the top is the Sulina channel. And then right in the middle is the Sulina channel. I'm sorry, the top one, Letea channel. And then the middle one is the Sulina channel. Now you notice that Sulina channel is a bit on the straight side. And if you know anything about rivers, you know that they don't flow in a straight line. And so that Sulina branch has been channeled, and this is the major port for Romania. And now with the troubles in Ukraine, where the Ukraine wheat was coming in, it was coming in through that Sulina branch in Romania. So that channels a little bit more on the straight side. And then down at the bottom of the delta, not quite at the total bottom, but at the bottom of the delta, then we have got the St. George Channel. So there's 3 major channels through the Danube Delta, and then a lot of other territory in between. UNESCO set this, designated the Danube Delta as a World Heritage Site back in 1990. And what spurred this on was during the communist regime in Romania, the dictator started draining the delta and turning it into agricultural land. So if you look over on the map on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's some gray areas up at the north of the map of the Danube Delta, and that is the area that was drained to turn it into agriculture. So taking this incredibly lush area and then turning it into agriculture was luckily prevented once UNESCO came in and changed it and designated it as a World Heritage Site, but then also with the government change in Romania, because it is a member of NATO now. This Danube Delta is 500 hectares, or for those of you like me that are into the acres, it's 1.2 million acres. So it's a large territory. And by designating it as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO, it's on par with our Grand Canyon here in the United States, Yosemite here in the United States, and then also something like the Galapagos Islands. And so it's been set aside with that designation so that there's a little bit more oversight into what goes on, because it is such a precious location. And for us, because I know a lot of you all like birds, and I've been out with you all with your cameras and photographing birds. But for us, this is also a major migratory flyway. So the Mediterranean Black Sea flyway is over on the right-hand side of this map. You notice that there's a flyway in Europe that goes through Spain. There's a southern flyway that goes through Italy, but your major north-south flyway, spring-fall flyway, goes through the Black Sea, right where Romania is and right where the Danube Delta is. So this means for us as bird photographers and bird watchers, we have birds from Africa and the Middle East flying north in the springtime, going through the flyway where the Danube Delta is, and then arching out into Europe and Asia. So this makes it also a doubly important place to preserve and protect, because it means that it's protecting our birds, and it's a major flyway for our birds. So one of the reasons that I wanted to go see it and wanted to experience it. So our first time that we crossed the Danube is in the little town of Braila, Braila. It's over on the left-hand side. And as we're going across the bridge, you know what? It looks like any big, huge river. But for us, it was pretty exciting because we had been planning this trip for so long. And so going across that river, that bridge, and seeing the Danube was pretty special. But there's another town, there's our little town right there where we crossed over. There's another town a little bit further down called Tulcea. And Tulcea is a fairly large town, and it is on that Sulina branch. It is the major port at the end of the Sulina branch in the Danube Delta. That that Tulcea is where a lot of tourists go. And for Romanians, the Danube Delta is a major tourist attraction. There's beaches down in the Delta, and then also we have all the river activities in the Delta. So in Tulcea, There's a big, huge promenade area. This is where the small cruise ships come in. You see that we've got high-rise hotels back in the distance. And so, a nice getaway for the weekend or a nice getaway for 4 or 5 days, Romanians are going to go to Tulcea. And then back on our map, we left Tulcea after lunch and then continued down the highways on the St. George branch to get to another little small town called Murighiol. And Murighiol is where we ended up spending 3 of our 7 days on the Delta. And Murighiol is loaded with hotels that cater to Romanians. So Romanian tourists are going down here all the time, using it as a place to cool off and a place to vacation with their family and their friends. But we are not roughing it down here at all. This is very fine, nice European rooms. You see that we've got a really nice, completely tiled bathroom. And so this is a place where a lot of Romanian tourists are also going, not necessarily for birds, but they're going down there for vacation activities. And you can see what a nice pool our hotel has, and you can look out over the distance and see the marshes of the Delta. And you can see also that the parking lot is completely full. So this is a place where a lot of Romanian tourists go, as well as European tourists. And taking you to another sort of map that gives you another view of what the Delta looks like. Our little town for our first 3 or 4 days is Murighiol, down here in this bottom. It's on the St. George Channel that I showed you on the map. And looking at this map, you see that there are red lines all over it. And the red lines are where the tourist boats are allowed to go. So you can branch out, like in that lake Uzlina and in the other Isak Lake. You can branch out from there in your boat, but these are the major routes that the tourist boat take. So when you realize that there's a map designated on the wall that shows where the tourist boat can go, and those tourist boats are in the red lines, that's when you start realizing just how much this is used by Romanians and people of the area as a vacation destination. So when we get to the boat dock, after checking in at the hotel, when we get to the boat dock, what we find are 75 to 100 boats that look just like this. And this is the major boat dock in Murighiol. Each one of these is going to be filled up during the day, and it's going to take people out into the Danube Delta. And as we get out into the channels, then you start seeing other tourist boats. And most of these are going out just to see the channels and that type of thing. They're not necessarily going out on intense bird watching like we were doing, or bird photography. So most of this is pleasure. Most of this is people from around the world who are venturing to Romania, or else it's local Romanians, and going out and seeing this really wild, exotic area. And as we get back on that map, can you all see my cursor? Rich, I can see your face. Shake your head up and down if you can see my cursor. Joe, can you all see my cursor? Good. Okay. So leaving Murighiol, we do this on a highway. And then we get to the boat dock right here. And then from there, we usually turn left. And then we go up this channel. And this is an old channel of the Danube. The straight line right there is a new modern cut across, but we go up this channel of the Danube. And then at Uzlina, you notice that there's a complex turistas, or a tourist complex at Uzlina. And Uzlina is a small little village up in there, but it's completely lined with guest houses and tourist hotels. And then we make a slight turn going through that narrow channel there. And then we come out into these 2 major lakes, Uzlina and Isak. And these are the destinations where most of the tourists to the Danube Delta are going. We kind of squeeze through that little town right there, go around through a small little channel, and then we go, most people end up going out into those two lakes. And coming out into those two lakes for the first time is where the birds really start becoming prominent. So, for instance, just in the very opening of that first lake, the Uzlina Lake, we get immediately our Caspian's gull, and this becomes our major gull for the Danube Delta. We get our Dalmatian pelican, and Dalmatian pelican looks like here in the United States, our American white pelican, only it has that sooty stuff all over it, those sooty feathers all over the top of its head. The Dalmatian pelican ranges all the way over into Asia. So it's got a fairly large population range, but over in the Danube Delta, they're not that plentiful. The most plentiful is the European white pelican, about the same size as our American
Not too
white
close,
pelican.
not too close.
Whoops, wait,
People are
Natalie.
getting hurt.
Natalie.
This meeting is being recorded.
I'll mute Natalie there. She's, but these, and by the way, the white pelican has kind of a pinkish color to it. And one of its largest nesting colonies in the world is up in the northern part of the Danube Delta, and that's a preserved territory. So one of those very special places in the Danube Delta. And then in that short period of time of hitting that very first lake, then we also get the Pallas's gull. And Pallas's gull is a gull that somebody asked me about years ago, would it be possible to see the Pallas's gull? And you see the range of the Pallas's gull. It's not that easy to see in Europe, but it is becoming more and more common in the Danube Delta and in that one lake, the Lake Uzlina. So it was nice for us on our very first day to get two target birds that I wanted to see, the Dalmatian pelican and then also the Pallas's gull, just a really handsome gull. And then moving on up into that, once we pass the Uzlina Lake, then we've got another Isic Lake right after that. And so once again, this is where the majority of tourists to the Danube Delta are going. But for me, it's looking off in the distance and seeing up against the shoreline these flats of lily pads and vegetation sticking up out of the water and tons of birds flying around, telling us that there's a lot of birds up ahead of us. And this, once again, is one of those things that the majority of tourists going through the Romanian Danube Delta do not stop for. They're just going out for the pleasure boat rides as opposed to looking for boats. But we, of course, are going to go closer to see what's in there. Overhead, you've got to deal with things like common poachers flying overhead. You've got to deal with all kinds of stuff distracting you, like the black tern. And by the way, it's the same black tern that we have here in the United States. It's a worldwide bird. And then as we get closer to all that bird activity on those reeds and those lily pads, we see the whiskered tern. And this is where we've got a whiskered tern colony. And look underneath it, you'll see that there's a little green egg. See that right underneath the whiskered tern? Now, this is a tern that lays its eggs on a lily pad, which to me seems like a very risky place to lay your egg, but apparently it works because there's a lot of them out there. And this little tiny egg sitting on a lily pad where the mother and dad whiskered tern have added all kinds of little pieces of vegetation to surround it. And then sitting there in our boat, this is where we can just sit quietly, not disturb them, just, don't have to move around too much. And this is where we can sit there and photograph as they're coming in and as they're dropping off vegetation and as they're squawking each other and doing all kinds of activities. So heaven for a bird photographer, because we can just sit there and photograph. And along the way in these lily pads and these reed beds, we get things like Eurasian coot. Looks a lot like our coot here in the United States, but it's just a Eurasian coot. Along the banks, we've got great cormorants. And then hidden down once again inside all of those little lily pads and things, and we get other birds like this redneck grebe, and you see it's got its two little babies with it. Squawko herons, beautiful little orange type heron with that beautiful blue beak. You can tell that we're there in high breeding season. And then for me, it was a delight because we encountered these great crested grebes. And you see his little horns up on the top of his head and his little flaring along his neck. And this great crested grebe kept popping up in front of our boat, kind of like, you know, the Whack-'em video game that we used to play. And it'd pop up and look around, and then it would pop down into the water, and then it would pop back up and look around, and it would flare its head. And as we got closer and closer and closer, then it would pop down and come back up in front of the boat. And after a while, we realized that it's just trying to lead us away from its nest. So it's just popping up in front of the boat, knowing that we'll follow it. And as we follow it, then it just keeps getting closer and closer, and we get our photos that we're looking for. And what we weren't able to see out in those reed beds or those lily pads was the female sitting on her nest. And then as we're able to drift just a little bit closer without disturbing her, then we get better and better photographs of her. So these massive swarms, not swarms, but fields of lily pads, once you got inside of them, just tooling around in your boat, not using much engine power at all, was where we ended up finding a lot of the birds that we were looking for. And they didn't seem to care at all that we were there. And occasionally with these great crested grebes, we would see them, the pair floating off. And if you look closely, they've got older chicks on their backs that they're just taking into a nice secluded location so that they can get away from us. So occasionally we would see them floating around with the little babies on their backs, as grebes tend to do. And in the same situation, once again, back in these lily pond or lily pad fields, we encountered also a mute swan. And it didn't take us long to figure out it was doing exactly the same thing, fluttering its wings over its back and acting like the dying swan in Swan Lake, and just leading us away from its mate with the babies, staying just close enough in front of our boat so that we can get our photos, so that we can enjoy it, and then staying at a nice, safe distance from us. And we encountered this a lot. And a lot of mute swans on these lakes, so that we had plenty of photographic time with the mute swans. And then under those trees along the banks, this is where we found the babies of the swans. When they were littler, they were out in the reed beds, but as they got a little bit older, then they got underneath those trees along the banks. So it was nice to kind of cruise the boat quietly underneath those trees and see what we could see and what we encountered. And they don't seem to notice that we're there. They don't seem to care that we're there, as long as everything just moves along at a nice, slow little pace. Now, I have to give credit to two people who made this really possible. Daniel Rosca coordinated the trip for Jackie with Strabo Tours. And Daniel is Romanian to the heart and loves Romania. So he coordinates all the trips that we do with Strabo around Romania. And then Daniel coordinated this trip for me and Strabo. And John, I won't even say his Romanian name, I just know him as Captain John. John was our boat driver. John is an excellent boat driver when it comes to photographing birds. He knows how to not get too close. He knows how far away we need to stay. He knows when the birds get stressed and we need to back off. He knows when they'll tolerate us. And he knows how to keep the boat right in position so that we as photographers can get the shots that we're looking for. So this really would not have been possible without John being our boat driver and knowing birds himself and being a bird watcher as well as a photographer. Daniel also is an outstanding photographer, so he knew where we needed to go as well. So I really have to hand it to both of these guys for making this trip a real success for us. And I have to hand it to the people who went with me on my trip, to Paul and Richard and Susan and Lynn and Daniel in the back, because we did 2 trips a day. We did a morning trip after breakfast. So after breakfast, about 8:30, we'd head out from the hotel, get in the boats at 9, be back about noon, then have lunch, have download time and nap time, and then we'd head back out at about 4 and stay out until about 6. So the group was hardy in being able to get into the boats twice a day and go out and look for our birds twice a day. So I have to hand it to the entire crew for all of this. And then back to that little map again that I showed you. John knew this area well enough to know that we needed to go to this other region of the lower Danube to look for some different types of birds. And what we're going to do now is we're going to head straight down this channel, which once again is a man-made channel. You see the oxbow of the Danube back up here. That's the traditional oxbow. So instead of turning and going up to Uzlina, we're going to turn and go straight down, and then we're going to come around. And back in this different area just gives us different birds that we can see. And so this is where we got our common shell duck, for instance, because it likes more open rivers as opposed to the more secluded lakes that we were in. We got our giant reed warbler. And for those of you that know warblers here in the United States that are little bitty, this guy is big. He's a really big guy. And listen closely to his song. Can you hear how loud that guy is? And that's just with my cell phone. So this is a really, really loud warbler on territory. And that's where he likes to hang out, is on top of these reeds in the reed beds and sing his little heart out. So a neat place. And then once, of course, you find one, then it's easy because he just stays up on that top of that reed and sings his little heart out. And so we can get all of our photographs that we're looking for. So a great place to find giant reed warblers. But then also in this new territory, we get things like gray herons and gray lag geese and hooded crows, of course, everywhere. And even marsh harrier, which is just as difficult as photographing a marsh harrier here in the United States. It does exactly the same behavior, different species. So a challenge, just like it is here in the United States, to get one. And then our white-tailed eagle, this was the major predator. Leonard's got an American bald eagle over his shoulder behind him, but this white-tailed eagle is a 4-year eagle, just like we have here in the United States and Canada. But the white-tailed eagle has a solid white tail, fishing eagle. So we saw it all the time, perched on top of trees, perched and soaring overhead. Very common bird for us to see. And then, of course, we had the European roller. If you've been to Africa, you know that we've got lilac-breasted rollers and different rollers down there. And in Europe, we've got the European roller. Didn't like to have its photo taken, but we saw it all the time. And so as we're going through these channels, then we're seeing not only new birds, but we're seeing also some more familiar birds that we've seen before and tried to photograph in different locations. Those of you that have been to Europe know what the cuckoo sounds like. It sounds just like a cuckoo clock, and they're everywhere. And we're listening to them all the time. They're constantly making noise, but the little boogers did not want to be photographed. So we just ended up stopping for them every time we saw them in hopes that we could eventually get close to one of them, which we did along the way. Common kestrel. Flies just like our kestrels here in North America. So it's a familiar bird that we know how to photograph it once you get it where it's helicoptering. But once again, just different types of birds. And in these channels over on this different region of the Delta, listen to this.
Yeah, we're not hearing anything, Kathy.
You're not hearing them? Do you have your
No.
sound turned up? Oh, you should. No? Okay.
I'm
Thanks
not
for
hearing
letting me know.
anything.
Okay. Sorry. Thanks for letting me know. Technical glitch on my end. This is all willows. And as these channels are just lined with willows after willows after willows, and in the willows are all kinds of passerines, the perching birds, but we can't see any of them because the vegetation is so dense. And so sometimes it just kind of drove us crazy as bird watchers because we could hear the birds, but we couldn't see them as much as we really wanted to in some of these dense channels. But once again, we were really lucky because the majority of Romanians and tourists to the Danube Delta are there to see the lily pads and the water lily flowers, and they're there to cruise along in the lakes and enjoy the hotels and the amusement parks and the other sites that are there to see. But we were there to bird, and it meant that we ended up getting a lot of this area to ourselves. We didn't have to share it with other tourists at all. And along the entire journey, we were the only photographic boat that I ever saw. So it is a location where we as photographers tend to have it solely to ourselves. So each evening, each morning, we're in the boats, we're heading out, we're doing our jobs. And it's a very hard job too, because you just have to sit there and twist your body around as the birds show up on the left and the right of the boat. So the hardest part of this was just twisting around in the boat. We were well fed along this part of the journey, and we even had little smiley faces on our eggs every morning. We had a fabulous Cabernet Sauvignon wine that was from the local Romanian vineyard. So we were well fed, well watered, and definitely had enough photos to download every afternoon and every evening when we came back, because there was plenty to see. And after our first 3.5 days at our first location at Murighiol, it was time to pack up, and John put all the luggage in the green boat. And we packed up, and I'm going to take you back to the map again, just to show you where we're going from now. And we're leaving the Murighiol area down in this part of the Danube Delta, and we are going up to the Sulina branch in this part of the Danube Delta. So now we're going to cover the middle branch of the Danube and then the upper river as well. And a beautiful thing about this trip and using John as our bird guide as well as our boat guide is John is from this part of the Danube Delta. He grew up in Sulina, and he currently lives in one of the other in Crisan. So this is his backyard. These are his birds, and this is what he knows. John and his wife have built this Casa Salon. This is the guest house where we stayed on their farm. The blue and white striped building is a brand new building with 6 apartments in it. And those 6 apartments each have a private bathroom to them. So don't think that we were toughing it out, because we were able to use John's gardens when we wanted to. And then this is what our rooms look like. So we had comfortable, modern, European styled rooms, air conditioner you can see up on the wall. And then super comfortable showers with walk-in showers. And with those 6 apartments in that guest house, it gave us all plenty of room that we could stretch out in. And then we also had a private dining room right offside of their house. And throughout the dining room, we have taxidermied specimens, furry specimens and fish that John has caught over the years. So we got to eat in this very Romanian, rustic Romanian country farmhouse type dining room. And it made the evenings and each one of our meal times a delight. And once again, we ate breakfast, lunch, and dinners back at the hotels every single day. So on this portion of the trip, We are going to stay at Crisan, and we're going to venture up and down the Sulina channel, which is that straight part of the Danube Delta. We're going to go to Mila 23, which just means mile 23 on the Delta. And we're going to go up to Letea, and then we're going to go also down a little bit south of Crisan to Kara Orman. So you notice that we've got lots of lakes to explore, and we've got lots of little places to explore in this part of the journey. And once again, boat driver John, bird guide John, this is where he lives. This is what he knows. And so he was able to tell us what was going to be around the next corner in terms of bird life, which made this part of the journey a real treat because we knew what to expect every time we were going out. So let me take you to Kara Orman. You notice that the roofs are caving in on these apartments. You see that? Well, this is a former Russian-built communist era factory town. And the roofs are now caving in. Around all of these apartments is broken glass and broken tile and broken ceiling tiles. It's not dangerous, but it's a trash heap. But in the rafters of all of these buildings, the common kestrel has set up territory. And so there must be 20, 30 common kestrels on the roosting and nesting in the tops of these buildings. The bottom of these buildings, by the way, the farmers use them as sheds for their animals now. So there's hay in them and things like that. But the kestrels have taken over the upper level. And so this gave us this wonderful opportunity just to stand around these derelict, disgusting buildings and photograph kestrels coming and going. This one's got a little green anole in his talons. This is also where the black-winged stilts were, behaving just like our black-necked stilts here in the United States. This is where we were able to stand around on the grasslands and photograph them as they flew by doing their antics. And this is where we got a European bee-eater colony. And I really, really wanted the European bee-eaters because I haven't seen them anyplace else. And so it was a treat to be able to stand around here and photograph them. And if you haven't photographed a European bee-eater, they're a bit bigger than a swallow, but they fly like a swallow and they're super fast, which makes them boogers to photograph. But on the other hand, a great fun, because when your camera locks onto them and you start tracking along with them and firing at the same time, then you know you've got to have a good photograph in there somewhere. So it was fun to do the bee eaters and then sometimes watch them land next to an old barn. So this was a place, Karaman, where we came back several times because it was close to Crisan. We could get there. And we ended up, because there was so much to photograph around those derelict old buildings, that we went down here a couple of times. And you can see we're all perfectly happy after we left. It was a little sad to see the buildings and everything else that was there, but at the same time, it was great for bird habitat. And then back on our map, once again, you can see where Karaman is down there. And then you can see all the other little places. We've got a lot of areas to explore in this. And during this part of the trip is where we just told John, these are the birds we want. So every day he would say, okay, what are you all looking for? And we would tell him, for example, the Eurasian hoopoe. So the Eurasian hoopies flew across the water all the time, but we never got them landing. And so John knew some trees where they nested, took us to those trees, and that's where we ended up getting our hoopies. So because he knew this area so well, he knew where our European rollers were. And as we rounded a corner in the boat on some channel, he would say, be prepared because there's rollers around this corner. It just made it a lot of fun. Common kingfishers, we would see going across the channels. And once again, because John lived in this area of the Delta, he knew exactly where they were. And so one day we just tied up across from a kingfisher nest, tied ourselves to the reeds, and we just got our fill of photographing them as they came and went with fish in their beaks, and even tried our hand at trying to get them in flight. So because of his knowledge, it made it so much easier to find the birds and to get the birds we wanted. Common terns, for instance, just like our common tern here in North America, it's a worldwide species, and it gave us a chance to be able to photograph them and work with birds in flight. You've probably already realized most of this trip was birds in flight. So we got a lot of practice photographing birds in flight. John knew where ferruginous ducks were. We didn't see that many of them. There's not that many in the Delta, but we could give it a check mark and get photos of it. Same thing with Gargany teal. So he knew where things were. This is their purple heron. I never saw any purple on it, but that's its name, purple heron. So it was fun to photograph that one. It's about the size of our tricolored heron here in the United States. And then once again, thanks to John's knowledge of the area, he knew where the red-footed falcons were nesting. So we were able just to cruise down that channel, shut off the engines to the boat, just use the troller from there on. And he was able to manipulate us into place so that we could photograph them while they were coming and going, and to be able to get full frame shots of them. We're using most of the time, by the way, the 100 to 400 or 100 to 500 millimeter lens. One of the Sony users was using a 300 millimeter prime with a 1.4x extender. And the same thing with Eurasian hobbies. These were frequent flyers over the channels. We saw them all the time, but trying to get them in flight, about the size of a European kestrel, trying to get them perched, trying to get full frame shots of them, took a little bit of work and just gave us that chance to have to go over and over and over again. And then we went up and visited a couple of the villages. This is Letea. It's a village, an old village way up in the north of the Danube Delta. And most of the people that we encountered, like this woman, were there taking care of their parents' homes. So their parents have already died, and people like this live in the city nearby. And they come and they take care of the house, or they take care of the garden. So what we saw was mostly older people in the village. And thanks to Daniel, our Romanian guide, can talk to anybody. So it gave us a chance to find out these villagers' stories and what their history was. And you see, for instance, this house was built in 1935. They have the year it was built on the side of the house. So it gave us a chance to learn a little bit more about the people in this region and their culture. Gave us a chance to photograph white storks. European white storks were on nearly every telephone pole that we saw throughout the entire Danube Delta, utility poles, I'm sorry. And then wood pigeons, for instance. So it gave us a chance to see more of what we would call the more residential birds. And we went to the village of Mila 23. Once again, that means mile 23 on the Danube, on the river that it happens to be on. Rustic, but along the main channel are all kinds of guest houses, because once again, this is a tourist location for Romanians and for people in this part of Europe. So there's this whole line of guest houses along the main channel, as well as discotheques and restaurants and all kinds of things. So we were staying on a little bit away from this, luckily. And then out on the main channel, the Sulina channel, this is the main straight channel in the Danube Delta. And while we were out there, it was not unusual for our little green boat to be following along behind a freighter that was traveling the world and either going in to drop off grain or other equipment or coming back out. As I said, before we ran into this recent trouble with Russia, the last couple of weeks, most of the Ukrainian grain shipments were coming up through the Sulina channel. So we saw a lot of boats boats coming up with grain to be offloaded at Tulcea. So we just spent a lot of time crossing along this wide part of the Danube Delta and weaving in and out of these freighters, which made it kind of interesting and kind of fun. But then in those little backwaters, John knew the places to take us to. So if we wanted that beautiful sunset photo, he knew what lake to take us to at sunset. And we got a really cool picnic evening dinner along with our wine. And John corralled these pelicans for us with the boat. And then he just kept moving the boat in and out, keeping them where they needed to be for our photography. And so we didn't have to worry about what we were doing. Our job was just to concentrate on the photo in front of us, but we had that wonderful boat driver who knew exactly what we needed, and then allowed us to stop and photograph the this full setting sun with the birds coming in to roost at night with those 500 millimeter lenses to get that big, nice full sun. So on the last day that we were in the Delta, we had heard so much about Ukraine because people here are in the Delta are of Ukrainian, Romanian, and Russian origin. We heard so much about Ukraine that we agreed with John that we needed to go down and see the Black Sea. So we traveled the last 20-something miles of the Sulina channel. We went all the way down to the end where the Romanian waters end, and you see over on the right-hand side is the Black Sea, and on the other side of those rocks is Ukraine. So it made us feel really special to be able to go all the way down there and see the Black Sea, as well as to see Ukraine on the other side. The seas that night were a bit too rough for us in our boat to go out any further, so we just had to make a little turnaround, but we all got our pictures with the Black Sea behind us and Ukraine on the other side. So it made it a pretty special ending to our time in the Danube Delta. And then we got to journey all the way back to our little Crisan guest house at sunset, which made it pretty special and a nice ending to our trip before we headed out. So if you all would like to unmute, that's our armchair adventure to the Danube Delta. And once again, our trip was arranged by Strabo Photo Tours. I see that Jackie has joined us on the trip, so she's here if you haven't met her before. And then Daniel Rosca, and there's both of those websites. And then John is our boat captain. And unfortunately, I just can't say his name as well as he did, so I'll just leave it at Captain John. Any questions for me? Unmute and ask me questions.
Kathy, did most people just take one camera body or did they take two?
We had it, each one of us had two camera bodies, but we just on the boat, we ended up taking one camera body. There was room in the back for us to put our camera bag. And so the first couple of days, somebody might have taken their entire camera bag, but it just got to where all we were using was the big lenses. So we had two cameras just in case. And I always recommend that when people travel on a trip like this. But mostly it was just having one camera in your hand at any given time. There was really the boat wasn't turning or twisting, so you could have had a smaller lens in your hand, but most of us just used our cell phones.
Thank you.
How many species did you see, Kathy?
We had a possibility of seeing about 150 species, but we ended up seeing probably in total about 75, which isn't that unusual for a bird photography trip. We usually see about half as much as what the bird watchers would see. So the bird watchers would have done a lot more walking around on foot on dry land, which we just didn't do that much walking around on dry land. But still, it was pretty cool with about 75 species of birds.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How long is the tour, Kathy?
Leonard, on this one, we were 7 days on the water and 2 days in Bucharest ahead of time, just to make sure that everybody's luggage got there, because it was such a long distance, is about 3.5 hours to the Delta from Bucharest, but we didn't want to have to worry about any lost luggage. So we did 7 days on the river, and then we did 2 days ahead of time, and then one day when we got, or one afternoon when we got back. So it was about a 9-day trip. And you can see also that this is a small trip. This is not a big trip. So if you are interested in doing this in the future, you might send a note to Jackie at Strabo Tours just to let her know that you are interested, because it would be a trip that where we could really only, because of the size of the boats, take maybe 6 paying passengers. So it makes it by its very nature a small trip.
Yeah. Kathy, what I'm assuming you flew into Bucharest.
We flew into Bucharest, which is for us, Houston to Frankfurt to Bucharest, Houston to Munich to Bucharest. You can do Bucharest on British Air out of London, or you can do Bucharest out of Vienna. So most of your major cities, Paris, Frankfurt, Munich, did I say Milan, but Munich, London, you're going to be able to get your next leg to Bucharest without having to fly too many places. So it's really just a 2-flight trip.
Good.
Pretty comfortable.
Right.
Other questions?
Kathy, when you were on the main river, did anyone feel uncomfortable because of the water in the boat, or?
No, and you know, it's a big river.
Yeah, I know.
And you know, you're there with ships. So I can
Mhm.
equate this to being in a ship channel, you know, because you are pretty small. But I never felt uncomfortable. John always mandated that we have life preservers on. We never went in that boat without a life preserver on. But even in the wide channels, I never felt uncomfortable. And there was one day when we had really high winds. Luckily, we were on transport that day, so we weren't trying to photograph, but we had really, really high winds. And the boat was having a lot of trouble in the wind, but he maneuvered it really well. And we got where we needed to go without too much trouble.
Okay.
And nobody ever got seasick either. So it was pretty good.
Good.
Other questions?
Kathy, is this one of your smaller trips compared to the other ones you go on other tours?
Right. This is a smaller trip. And, you know, most of the trips that we do with Strabo will be 10 to 12 people. And by the way, if you all haven't met Jackie, she's the lady with owner under her name there. So just in case you all haven't seen her face to face before. But yeah, this was one of our smaller ones. And originally, before I did it, I thought that we could take more people, but after seeing how big the boats are, because all the boats are the same size on the Delta, I see that this really needs to be a small boat trip. And also just because you're maneuvering over each other and you're shooting over each other's heads and you're having to slouch sometimes so that somebody can shoot over your head, it's got to be a small trip, which to me makes it really nice.
Right.
Yeah. Other questions? So it is fun. And then coming up tours, these are on my schedule with Strabo. Costa Rica Birds is coming up in February 2024, and this is going to the south of Costa Rica. Some of you have already been to Costa Rica with me, to the north or to the central part, but this one's going to the south. Tanzania Photo Safari is coming up in May. And then the Pantanal Jaguars, several of you all have already done that with me, and we're going back again. Once again, birding by boat. It's becoming one of my most favorite things, is to photograph birds from a moving boat. And then Puglia, Italy, no birds, just strictly culture. And then we're going to Costa Rica Northern Birds in November of 2024. And those are all with Willie Alfaro, for those of you who have traveled with Willie, my guide in Costa Rica before. And there's Jackie's email, just in case you don't have her contact information. It's there at the bottom if you want to tell her that you're interested in any one of the trips. What else is coming up, Jackie?
Oh, boy, we have a lot of different things with Ron and the Bulls and a lot of Europe, a lot of you and I were actually talking about maybe doing an Ecuador maybe in 2025 sometime,
Correct.
another birding tour. So
Yeah, and then for many of you all, I just finished up the Alaska bird trip. We did seabirds this time. So there's a lot coming up in the future.
Is the Tanzania one going to be similar to the Tanzania trip that we took?
Exactly.
mhm,
That was
Exactly.
wonderful.
It
It
was-
was just a wonderful trip.
mm.
Yeah. Yeah. And a couple of the people who've already been with me before are going again because I haven't been in maybe 10 years.
Right.
So it's kind of nice to go back with new equipment and see new things again. But it's the same trip that we had before. It's quite a winner, by the way. If you're thinking about a Tanzania photo safari, the one that Jackie has put together with Strabo is absolutely amazing. Great guides, great hotels, great lodges,
Mhm. And lots of birds.
and lots of birds. Exactly, exactly. Because a lot of the safaris don't stop for all the birds, but we are definitely stopping for all the birds. Any other questions?
What are the major animals on the Tanzania safari?
So that's all your major animals. So that's your lions and your elephants and your cheetahs and your leopards and your rhinoceros, even though you might only see one rhinoceros, but your rhinoceros, your hippos, it's all your major animals, as well as most of the time we end up getting a civet cat or some of the smaller cats. And then, of course, all the birds. So definitely, I remember one trip having to tell people, we will stop for these lions because when you get home, there are no lions on your way to the grocery store every day. So sometimes people just get overwhelmed with how much they've seen, but we have to keep it in perspective.
Kathy, the Tanzania trip then, do you stay multiple, like maybe 2-3 nights at one location and then just kind of go around to different?
Correct. And we kind of mix it up too, and staying in hotels and then staying in tent camps, which those of you who've been to tent camps know that this is, kind of like staying in a camp that Ernest Hemingway might have stayed in, luxurious tent camps with
Really nice.
Yeah, really nice tent camps, hot water showers and wonderful wines and dinners and that type stuff. So we mix it up between the hotel and the tent camp to kind of give that variety. It makes it really special. And then here is all of our contact information. Any other questions? Or have you seen any more? Scroll through. Have you seen any more of your traveling companions that you've been around the world with before we sign off? Anybody else that you want to say hi to?
I'd like to say hi to Jackie. It's been a while
Hi,
since I've seen her.
We seem to keep missing each other.
I know. And I keep thinking that when I drive down to Pennsylvania one of these times, I'm going to, because I come down 81,
Right.
I'm going to make arrangements for us to have coffee together.
I know, we should. Definitely.
It's amazing the bonds that we form on these trips. They carry us through all of the events of our lives and leave us with a tremendous amount of really nice memories. Friendships and memories. Yeah. Okay. Any questions before I leave you for tonight?
No, thank you.
No.
Thanks.
Well,
this
thanks
is
very
wonderful.
Thank
Thanks.
you very much.
You are welcome. I'll post this and I'll send you all a link to the recording if you'd like to share it with anybody else. And once again, if you want to get your name on the waiting list. If we do the trip again, then just send Jackie a note and let her know, or send me a note, whichever one you'd like to do. Or if there's a trip in the future that you'd like to go on, go ahead and sign up for it now. Yeah. Okay, guys, thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Kathy.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.